coffee, watching the spectacle unfold like it was street theater. The best part? Inside the van was clearly just a folding chair, a pair of binoculars, and an empty bag of trail mix. It wasn't just ridiculous, it was desperate. That same afternoon, Lisa texted me a photo from the group chat. It showed Karen crouched beside the van, fiddling with a wire, her expression tense and triumphant like she was defusing a bomb instead of staging a scene. The caption read, "Is this what HOA oversight looks like now?" The post got shared faster than last year's firework mishap video. That evening, the neighborhood Facebook page exploded with comments. One guy said Karen was giving off low-budget spy movie vibes, and another said he thought the van was part of a prank show. But the piece de resistance came when someone posted a 15-second audio clip caught from across the street of Karen whispering into what she clearly believed was a hidden microphone, muttering, "Operation Chlorine Watch is a go." I nearly choked on my sandwich. She'd gone fully rogue. But while she was playing secret agent in her knockoff mystery van, I was working behind the scenes. Evan, my cousin and legal wizard, helped me draft an official notice of violation against Karen based on her trespassing, surveillance, and her fake title of HOA Safety Commissioner, a position that literally didn't exist. But even before I could serve it, the universe handed me a gift wrapped in gold ribbon. Someone, probably Jeff, who had developed a quiet vendetta after she accused his grill smoke of intimidating nearby vegetation, leaked more footage from their yard cam. It showed Karen walking through Lisa's side yard with a notebook, whispering to herself about potential hazards in decorative stone arrangement and suspicious lack of solar lighting. When confronted, she claimed she was conducting an environmental audit. Lisa told her to audit her way back through the gate before she called animal control to report a feral busybody in a visor. Karen stormed off, muttering something about community standards and filing an incident report. In the meantime, I made a public service post outlining all the HOA rules that Karen had violated in the last 2 weeks alone, including impersonating an enforcement officer, unauthorized property surveillance, and creating community unrest. I included screenshots, camera footage, and direct citations from the HOA charter. The post went mildly viral within our little cul-de-sac kingdom. That same night, someone in the neighborhood left a flamingo pool float on Karen's lawn with a note that simply said, "Remember the splash." I didn't claim credit. I didn't have to. Karen, however, decided this was an all-out war. She marched to my driveway the next morning and taped a handwritten cease and desist letter to my garage door. She wrote it in red marker, underlined everything twice, and signed it, President of Residential Morality. I didn't even respond. I just peeled it off, added it to my now thick Karen Files binder, and waved to her as she power-walked back to her house muttering about HOA conspiracies. What she didn't realize was that she had already lost control. The more she tried to exert power, the more absurd she became, and the more the neighborhood began to peel away from her grip. It wasn't just that people were mad, it was that they were entertained. She was a living sitcom now, a self-sabotaging spectacle in flats and highlighter-colored cardigans. But then came the twist. On a Tuesday afternoon that started off quiet and humid, Karen made a move no one expected. She showed up at my front porch, not with a citation, but with cookies. Store-bought, obviously. Sugarless. Dry. She handed them to me without making eye contact and mumbled something about a truce. It was the weirdest 5 seconds of my life. I nodded slowly and waited for the punchline. It came 3 hours later when I discovered a hidden camera taped under the decorative awning over my pool gate. It was a cheap motion sensor webcam duct-taped in place with a sticker labeled Neighborhood Safety Review. I stood there in stunned silence for a moment, then took it down, walked over to her property, and placed it gently on her welcome mat. I didn't say a word. Just a knock on her door and a walk away. 20 minutes later, the camera was gone, and Karen was back on Facebook, ranting about neighborhood threats to her mental well-being, and how she was considering legal action against unauthorized fence tones. Fence tones. I had no words, but something else was brewing beneath the comedy. Because Karen's spiral wasn't just ridiculous, it was revealing. She was afraid. She was losing control, and it showed. Her voice got shriller. Her posts got more frantic. She started fining people for imaginary violations, unregistered patio chairs, dangerously enthusiastic gardening, leaf blower recklessness. It was like watching a puppet flail after the strings had been cut. And behind closed doors, the neighborhood began to prepare. Evan had already drafted a motion for Karen's formal removal from the board. The signatures were growing. Margaret had collected 17 in one afternoon alone, and Jeff claimed he had 5 more if we promised to let him run the HOA barbecue next spring. We scheduled the vote for the following Saturday. Public. In person. At the neighborhood rec center. Karen wouldn't be able to control it, edit it, or talk over it. And when the votes were counted, the truth would be too big to drown with threats or flamingo float memories. We were done playing her game. We were building our own. And it had room for peace, privacy, and possibly a new splash pad if the budget allowed. Karen just didn't know yet. But she would. And when she did, it wouldn't come with a knock. It would come with applause. Saturday arrived with the kind of quiet tension you could feel in the sidewalk. It was the kind of morning that didn't smell like breakfast or lawn clippings or sunshine, but anticipation. By 9, cars started rolling into the neighborhood rec center's small parking lot, and by 9:15, Margaret had already set up a card table near the front doors with a neatly handwritten sign that said, HOA emergency vote, registered residents only. Jeff brought a cooler of lemonade and set it beside her like he was manning a campaign booth at a fair. People showed up holding lawn chairs, water bottles, reusable bags filled with folded copies of fines they'd saved out of spite, and that same quiet but undeniable energy of people who had waited too long for someone to finally stand up to a tyrant in orthopedic sandals. Karen arrived fashionably late, of course, marching in with a manila folder tucked under her arm, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard so full of crinkled papers it looked like a nervous wreck. She wore her usual pale yellow cardigan, a pearl necklace, and a stiff-lipped smile that cracked slightly when she saw the turnout. Nearly 40 people had shown up, a record even for potluck. She scanned the room with the wary eyes of someone who'd walked into what she thought was a celebration, only to realize she was the piñata. The meeting began with the standard HOA formalities. Lisa stood up and read a 2-minute summary of the agenda in a tone that made it sound like we were planning to demolish a city rather than host a vote. Then, Karen took the floor and launched into a speech so perfectly detached from reality that it would have qualified for a historical reenactment. She rambled about the importance of neighborhood integrity, about how her surveillance efforts had reduced crime by 12%, although no one could recall a single crime in the last decade aside from Jeff's inflatable Santa being decapitated by a windstorm. She called the vote a witch hunt orchestrated by disgruntled parties with political aspirations, and warned of chaos should the community fall into the hands of people who didn't understand boundary enforcement. She closed by declaring that her only motivation had ever been the safety and aesthetic cohesion of the neighborhood. Not a soul clapped. Then I stood up. I hadn't written a speech. I didn't need to. I just held up a printout of Karen sitting in my pool on a flamingo float, pointing angrily at the sky while water dripped off her visor. A few chuckles rolled through the crowd. I passed around the footage screenshots, some of the complaints, and the trespassing clause highlighted in the HOA charter. I didn't yell, I didn't mock her. I just let the evidence speak, piece by piece, picture by picture. Then I turned to the room and said, "This isn't about lawns. It's about power. We're neighbors, not suspects." That got more than a few nods. What followed was something no one had expected, a live debate. People stood up, one by one, and shared their stories. Some were funny, like the guy who got fined for hosting a spiritually insensitive chili cook-off. Others were painful, like Priya, who broke down crying as she described how Karen had photographed her daughter's birthday decorations and sent a warning about inflatable emotional pollution. One by one, the wall Karen had built around her authority started to crack. Each voice was a hammer. Each memory was a nail. By the time Margaret read out the motion to vote, Karen's smile had disappeared entirely, and the clipboard trembled in her hands. The vote was written, not raised. One by one, people approached the table, dropped their ballots into a repurposed lemonade jug Jeff had cleaned out the night before, and returned to their seat. It took 22 minutes to count. Evan double-checked everything with 2 volunteers. Karen sat in a folding chair, arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was hugging her past decisions for comfort. I stood by the back wall, watching in silence, heart steady. I wasn't worried. I was ready. When Lisa announced the final tally, 32 in favor of removal, 7 against, and 1 abstained, the room didn't cheer right away. It was too stunned. It had actually happened. Karen blinked again, and stood up like she'd just realized she was on a different planet. She asked for a recount. Lisa handed her the paper and said, "You're holding it." What happened next wasn't triumphant, but surreal. Karen tried to declare the vote invalid, citing a clause about emergency sunshine code compliance. Evan calmly pointed out that no such clause existed. She demanded a delay due to procedural irregularities, then tried to dismiss the entire meeting on the grounds that Jeff had previously used HOA electricity to charge his leaf blower. It was a meltdown of bureaucratic proportions, each statement more desperate than the last. Eventually, Lisa had to gently tell her to sit down or vacate the premises. Karen stood still for a moment, then walked out, folder under arm, past the lemonade cooler and the card table, down the steps and out to her car. The door slammed, the engine started, and she drove off without saying a word. No explosion. No apology. Just silence. But the story didn't end there. Not even close. The vote had passed, but Karen hadn't surrendered. Within 24 hours, she submitted a request to appeal the vote through the city's neighborhood mediation office. Evan handled it with the efficiency of someone who'd untangled far worse messes in real court. Meanwhile, we got to work. Jeff and Lisa set up a transition committee. Margaret suggested we finally install the dog waste stations the HOA had been delaying for years. I volunteered to draft the new HOA Code of Transparency. It wasn't flashy work. It was emails and policy sheets and revisiting dusty paragraphs that hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. But every time I opened a file or attended a meeting, I thought about Karen floating in my pool, arms flailing, yelling about safety inspections. I thought about the flamingo, and I smiled. But of course, Karen wasn't done. The day after her removal, a new flyer appeared taped to half the mailboxes in the neighborhood. In dramatic bold letters it read, "If you think you're safe now, think again." Below it, a manifesto of sorts, accusations that the vote had been rigged, that the neighborhood was being overrun by radicals, that someone had replaced the HOA water dispenser with unfiltered municipal swill. She signed it, former president, HOA in exile. No one took it seriously, except maybe the teenager down the street who used it as a backdrop for a parody TikTok. By week's end, peace returned in small but meaningful ways. A chalk art contest popped up along the sidewalk. Lisa's wind chimes were back. Jeff grilled again. Neighbors talked over fences instead of around them. And me? I finally swam in my pool without checking over my shoulder for someone lurking in a lemon-scented blazer. But even then, I knew we hadn't heard the last of Karen. She was the type who didn't vanish quietly. Somewhere, in a garage or rented storage unit, she was probably drafting her next great scheme, clipping newspaper articles and plotting a comeback. But now we weren't afraid of her. Now we knew the rules better than she did. Now we had each other. And now, every time someone heard the faint echo of a visor-wearing tyrant yelling about unauthorized patio joy, they'd smile, shake their heads and say, "Not this time, Karen. Not this time." It didn't take long for Karen to make her next move, and she came at us not with one attack but several, like a bitter octopus flailing